Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for September 13th, 2024. I'm Benji Fisher moderating. Ralph Kohler is sharing his screen. And also present are Simo Helston and Aaron McHale. Go ahead, Ralph.
We are looking at the same issue we've taken a look at in the last 10 minutes of last week's meeting. It's issue number 3470497, add a title formatter. I'll go quickly through in the interface. Oh, 1 second. I'll also share my, apologies for the quick animation. I'll share my instance as well. Too many windows open. Where's the chat? There's the chat and post it. Also admin. And let's quickly go through the setup because Aaron wasn't there last week. It's basically on a content type for in the steps to reproduce. It's basically you had to add a plain text field, and then you have basically over here in the manage display page, per default, just the plain text, but with the patch in place, you get the option title. And if you go to the settings, then aside the link to the content, you also have the option to set basically the tag for that field. So basically you can choose between span, div, h1 to h6. And in the front end, it looks like, let's go to content and test. So, I'll go back to the edit here. Yeah, the plain text is just, this is a test. And as you can see here, this is a test underlined. And if we go, in here and take a look there, then you can see H2 as, too many windows. It was set content fields. Yeah, as it was set here, display as H2. So, any questions?
I see that Offershal has joined us in the last few minutes. So this formatter would be available for any plain text field?
As far as I understood it, yes.
And I noticed looking at the issue, it says that it is split off from some other issue, and there's also a parent issue. So I think it's part of a larger plan, which maybe the goal is to let us format the actual title field using this formatter, and adding the formatter is one step in that.
Yep. It's in the context, as you said, making the base field like the title field available there. At the moment, it is not. And that is, I guess, the main objective for the meta issue, enabling all that.
So for the moment, to control scope, they've created this sub-child issue, and it seems like a reasonable thing to do. Oh, I'd like to note also Andres Vankov just joined us.
Yes.
Hi. So what are the usability concerns here? Is it a question of the admin interface? Are there any problems raised there? Or I guess before asking that, I should first check, does anyone else have any questions about what this particular issue does?
All clear?
Okay. Can we search the issue and for the word usability and see whether anyone raised particular usability concerns when they added the tag? This is changing the UI, so adding the usability tag. As a new form, this should have a usability review as well. So adding that tag. And screenshots available from the issue summary.
So no particular questions. The only detail is something, I think, what was it? Oh yeah, in comment number 16, M. Radcliffe wrote, could a site builder end up creating a situation where they set the subtitle to use H2 and then the hierarchy no longer matches between teaser and page views?
Yes, that's certainly a possibility. That's sort of a known problem with Drupal. That it's difficult to get the correct hierarchy of header tags. I don't think that this makes it any worse. You have the option of just using a span or a div. So I guess the usability question is just, are there any changes that should be made to the admin interface? Like, for example, is title the best name for this formatter? And I'm poking around at your sample site, Ralph. Did you put it on the basic page or the test content type? Right, it's on the test content type. Um, so is title a good name for this formatter? Um,
I think it looks more like a heading than title.
And you get a thumbs up from Ralph.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing as in title and heading sort of interchangeable, or I mean, both could be used, but if the only option is H2, then it's actually heading rather than the title.
Okay, Ralph, could you open up the configuration again? Because I guess Andre missed that demonstration. H2 is not the only option.
Well,
Or
span and diff.
I see, okay. But yeah, I often find myself in terms of naming things whenever I have, headings or titles, like what is the best label for that? Like if it's an H tag, but yeah, if there's divs and spans in there too.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Thanks. Sorry, my something happened with the Zoom and I had to restart it. So I missed a little bit of the conversation just there, but so I'm not sure what's been said already, but I'll just give my thoughts and then we can hopefully some of it's been covered. I think that this is certainly a positive step forward. And I like that it's being done in a way you could apply this to other fields, because I know that sites that I've worked on with particularly complex content models, this would be quite useful. I actually think I did catch what you were saying, Benji, about the issue where yeah, if you have a teaser, an H2 is always not appropriate. And actually this potentially helps to, I think, mitigate that, because then in the teaser view, you could set the title to be, H4 or whatever's the most appropriate for that particular view display. So I think that this is actually a really positive step and potentially mitigating the issue of mismatched content structures. And definitely something I would take advantage of. Yeah, and I think that the only comment I have, I suppose, on the drop down, I guess I would, to me, to me the word tag, although I was going to say maybe it should be heading level or something, but actually I see that there is, as you point out, there's more than just H tags in there. There's span and div. So, but then I do wonder, like, how if this is meant to be for titles, like how appropriate is when would you ever want a title have being a span or a div, right? It's, to me it feels like we should be really careful about the scope of this, because then could you say, well, there should be A tags in there and we should have list tags. Does this then become a generic formatter that supports changing a tag? So like, I think the scope of this has to be really, really clear in that regard. So, but if it's then just heading levels, I would say we should be clearer about that. And the drop down would be like heading levels, and then you could say heading 1, heading 2, that kind of thing. Those are my thoughts. So again, I don't know what's already been said. So
Yeah, I guess we were first discussing whether title is the right label for this formatter, but yeah, those are all good points. Ralph?
Thank you. First, I think it's worth to consider if span and div is appropriate, providing the opportunity to add or to use those here, and maybe just reduce it to H1 to H6, like Aaron said. And one other point in regards of the point Matthew Radcliffe raised, as well as I think I've suggested last week to introduce some sort of automation, but I thought about it during the week, and I think it's not always possible to ensure that you have no gaps in between heading levels. But maybe I thought, instead of making things automated, and it's probably out of the scope for this issue, but as a follow-up, because you basically, you know which fields you have before and which fields you have after the plain text field. And therefore, you know basically the semantics for these. On if you have a what you see is what you get field, then within it's a bit more complicated. But would it make sense basically within that setting to have basically next to the tag, or however it will be called, select field, the previous field has the heading level, for example, H2, and the field afterwards has the heading level H3, for example.
Okay, Aaron?
Thanks. Yeah, I sort of have that idea. I'm not totally sure is a good idea. I feel like we'd be adding a lot of complexity. And to give an example of a site I'm working on right now, some of the heading levels and the content are actually coded into the templates. So, you know, we would want to be really clear about setting that. And I think part of me thinks from an accessibility perspective, like that you, especially like if you said there's a WYSIWYG field above it, just say for instance, it'd be really hard to know what the most appropriate one is. So my gut feeling is we should steer clear of any kind of like way of trying to automatically detect it, because the site knows, you know, every site has a different content model, every site has a different structure. We can't know what that is, and we can't know what kind of nuances exist around that. And heading levels are things that people should, I would hope, are well educated on, although I know not everybody is. So yeah, I'm not sure I would support any kind of like automated guessing of it.
Yeah, I think you know, Ralph's idea of having some way of automating it is worth exploring. I've thought about that too. And certainly you wouldn't want to make it too automatic. You don't want to give up control of heading levels. But I think there could be some mechanism that's a little smarter and sort of baked into the twig templates than what we're currently using. Like if you could have the option of passing to a twig template um, the current heading level and then let the twig template decide how to use that. I think that's worth exploring, but that would of course be a separate issue, not something we would want to do here. One more thing, Ralph, could you open the link that I posted? I'd like to point out there's a module I like to use called Fences, and I've added it to this site, and it allows the same sort of customization. And if you go to admin structure, content types, and then look at the article content type and manage display. And if you look at the configuration, for example, of the body field, or the settings, I should say, and expand the fences drop down. So this gives a lot of options. Like one of the neat things you can do is you know, create lists just by assigning UL or OL to some as the field wrapper, and then LI as the element for the field item. So, and you know, this module has been around for a while and some thought has been put into the configuration form. And we're not going to try to bring the whole module into core, but we can get some inspiration from this. So for example, there's not a lot of help text. There isn't help text on every item. And if you compare that to what we've been looking at, I think the help text on the tag is unnecessary. It's also a little bit ungrammatical, but do we need that help text, or is it pretty clear what the tag is going to do? And Ralph, do you want to reply to that, or do you have something else you want to bring up?
I would like just a brief reply to the points before from Aaron and
Okay.
you, and then a brief comment in that regard as well. The suggestion I had was not anymore anything automated. It was mainly about providing some information based on which the user can decide and don't have to manually go into other fields to check what basically the heading level is, the last one that was used there. And that way, to provide a sort of level of convenience and information, but still no automation. And that was the idea. At first, my initial idea was to automate it to a certain degree, but yeah, just to provide an information. And yeah, with the example you've provided, Aaron, with baked into the Twig template, yeah, an automation would be even more problematic. Therefore, my thought was simply just keep it informational here. And in regards here, I think for the description, it would be still good where that H tag is used. So, but the sentence could be stripped down and shortened from my perspective. But still, it would be good to provide at least a certain context.
Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess if we're so I guess it depends what, like, if we're saying that, okay, so what am I trying to say? Because I'd said earlier about should the drop down contain more than just heading levels? And if it shouldn't, then we can like reword it to be more specific to heading levels and not just about the tag you select. And therefore that would sort of impact the help text. So maybe we should, vote or decide on what our recommendation is first in regards to like the naming of the drop down and what's in it, and then that'll help inform the help text that's there, perhaps.
Good point. Okay, so should we include span and div as options here? What would be the use case of that?
I think that's something that basically to have some meaningful use for that, it would mean theming anyways. And you can always, if you're doing theming at file system level, then you can always add your own tags to specific fields. So then it's kind of loses its usefulness to have it in the graphical user interface. Because as it is, span and div are not so useful. So I think if we want to have something that is going to be used while coding, then I think it's better to use the template system for adding the tags. But
That you get a thumbs up from Aaron. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I think it's quite useful to have some sort of system in the graphical user interface. And actually, I had almost forgotten about fences because I used to use that in 2015. So, but it's a bit complicated, maybe. here, but it's something that could be thought of.
Right. You also got a thumbs up from Ralph. And the fences module, by the way, also lets you add CSS classes. So it's really helpful if you're using something like a Bootstrap-based theme, that you can add your classes through the user interface like this. But again, I'm not advocating that that we do everything that Fences does. So if you want to use just a span or a div, then what's the default formatter for plain text? And would you have any advantage of using this formatter with a span rather than the default formatter? Again, I'm trying to think what would be the use case of having something other than a header tag for this field. I guess it gives you the option to link to the content. I suppose if you have some sort of deeply nested list, or if you don't know how deeply nested it's going to be, then you might not want to use any sort of heading tag, because then you run the danger of breaking the heading structure. Ralph, what's your comment? This is the default for a new field?
I've just created another plain text field just to see what the default is on manage display for a new field with no modifications, because on the other one we already did modifications. And I just created another one to see what's out of the box, the default for user. And it's basically unchecked link to the content, and as tag, it's H2.
Right, and I assume that's the default because it's mimicking the current hard-coded H2 for teasers. Right, in the node template in Drupal core, it checks to see whether it's the full content or not, and if it's the full content, it uses an H1 for the title, and otherwise it uses an H2. So by the way, a sort of more realistic use case of this would not be editing the default display as you've been doing, but editing the teaser display.
Yep.
But Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Simo's point. I can't, like, I'm trying really hard, and without, like, I cannot think of a useful use for like span or div, because on their own they do, like, they have no, without going in and adding templating, there's like no extra value to using those. And I feel like that's really like, the fences module looks great, and I actually now kind of want to use it, but like I think that's really out of scope for what this issue is trying to do. And if we try and expand it to make span and title useful, this issue is never going to get done. So I feel like, yeah, I especially because the formatter is named title, which I think is a good, like, I think it's better to have like a useful named formatter that's more specific, because it helps people understand what it does. So like I feel like we just need heading levels. Like, that's my feeling.
So I can imagine a site where the teaser might be used as, anywhere in the hierarchy. And so would we have to create a display mode instead of just a single teaser, but have a different display mode for each nesting level that it might be under, and say, and make one of them an H3 and then the next one an H4 and the next one an H5? And if we did that, we might want, a sufficiently nested, deeply nested one not to use a header tag, but still link to the content. And I guess linking to the content is the one thing that you can't do with the plain text formatter. Oh, and I see Thomas Howell has joined us. Thomas, I think you were here last week and we had a brief look at this issue, and we're now going deeper into it. This new title formatter. So I guess I kind of think that there might be use cases for something other than a header tag. Where we might want to link to the content, but we might not want to use a header tag.
I think the only cases I can think of doing that would be like if you're displaying the content in the individual fields in using views. And in that case, then this doesn't matter because you're using views. And when you display the individual fields, you select, usually they just come out as plain text anyway. Or you select the format you want or whatever. So
well, I actually like to use display modes when I'm using views. Thomas, go ahead.
What about if it was just a kind of an abstract or something like that, and you wanted to be able to just inherently link it back to something, or a short summary, things like that, where you may not want to have to worry about linking the whole thing, but the idea is people can click anywhere on the content and it takes them to the full thing.
Yes, I think you're saying the same thing that I am, that there might be use cases where you want to link to the content, but you'd...
Yes. I guess I was trying to give a concrete situation where I personally might do what you were saying. So I agree with you. I just was trying to give support for that position.
Okay. And actually, now that I look at it, the plain text formatter does give the option to link to content. So that is not a reason. So I'm afraid now that I've gotten someone to agree with me, I'm changing my mind. So both the plain text formatter and the new title formatter give the option to link to the content. So if we can do that with plain text, then now I'm thinking that we don't need to include span as an option in the title formatter. Yeah, Ralph, can you open up the options for that plain field?
Oh, I had to reload.
Yeah. So you see there is that option. So if we don't want to use a header tag, we can use the plain formatter. And if we do want to use a header tag, we use the title formatter. Does that make sense? I get a thumbs up from Ralph.
In the plain text formatter will by default wrap things into a div. Do we know?
Oh, 1 second. Just save and go to content. Edit. Plain.
So Aaron, you can go next as soon as Ralph finishes this little experiment.
Oh, 1 second. I forgot. Link to content as well.
So without that, it was just using a div.
Yeah, div and div, and within then the h tag, a tag.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for testing that.
So Aaron?
I have a thought that I don't even want to bring up because I worry it'll open a whole can of worms. But now that I've said that, I should probably say it. I'm wondering if the plain text formatter should just have an option to set the tag. That was my that was my can of worms. But I'm gonna not. I don't want to start that conversation. What I do wonder is if this new formatter should be called like heading or something rather than title, because I feel like, as we're seeing in theory, you could use it for any field, and if you just want it as a heading, that's what you can do with this. So the fact that this can be used for the title field is almost like arbitrary in some ways.
Yeah, I always say that you should name something after what it does, not what you plan to use it for. So if this thing provides the header tags, then I would rather name it header rather than name it title, because I expect to use it for the title field. But I was actually having exactly the same thought, that if the only difference between this and the plain text formatter is that it allows different tags, then why not add an option to the plain text formatter? And then we don't have to worry about how to name it.
Yeah. Can we maybe, just for our own sanity, could we maybe take a look at the some of the other available formatters? Because I can't remember what some of the other ones that you could use, just so we know what we're potentially getting into here.
So in Drupal core, I think the only available formatter for plain text is the plain text formatter.
Mm. I guess
Right.
if it's like a long text field, you've got like things like, what if you got like, you've got formatted, you got like with summary, without summary, is that right? There's like, yeah, trimmed, summary trimmed. See, there's always, I guess this is always the question, because you could say, well, why don't we just have one formatter for format text, and that is just the option, there's just an option, right? There's always this like question of like, when does that make sense to? Yeah, I suppose with a link field, there's a link formatter, and yeah.
So Thomas, go ahead.
I apologize if this has already been answered, but so with the title, we can choose the header tags. Can that list be controlled somewhere? So, or like this is, or I guess, no, this is the control. You're picking only one, and then you're saying that title does that. So you can't give people options for, they could do H1 or H2 if they wanted to. The field gets one option, that's it, and it's called title. Is that correct?
I guess I'm not quite sure what you're asking.
So if I have a plain text field and sometimes I want to use the plain text field, like because I do silly things in other areas. I'm thinking of R Markdown, where sometimes I'll decide I want to make a particular thing in H2 and sometimes H3 because it builds menus off of my H's, off of my header tags. And I didn't know if that's changed. Like it looks like it's fixed, and I just wanted to confirm that. So we're creating a format that picks one specific header tag and it applies that and calls it title. So to the point you made just a little bit ago about calling something by what it does, not by how you want to use it, I'm just trying to confirm that if I'm creating this plain field, I pick one of these options. That is the only option that someone who's creating content will ever have. They won't even know that there was a choice. So if it were set to be div, it'd be set to be div, and they would just have to accept that plain text can be kind of normal or div.
That's right. And the one thing I would add to that is that the site builder might have several different display modes for the content type, and each one could choose a different heading level. And then when those display modes are used, whichever display mode is used determines which configuration of the formatter is used, so it determines which heading level to use.
At risk of sounding like a yes person, I'm going to agree that I'm not fond of calling this title in this context because of how, like with those display modes, with how complex we could potentially use this. I think it would be better to call it something more like header tag or something that made it more clear how people were using this, like what it did. So I agree with you.
Okay. So I'd like to take a vote on whether to improve the existing formatter instead of adding a new one. But Aaron, you want to say something first?
Yeah, I guess it's just on that overall thought that you're kind of leading to vote on. One of our sort of tests for when we should add something to core or do something different is like, can this be used as a framework for building on top of? And so I think I was trying to think of an example of why we would like make this a separate, formatter. And the thing I can come up with, and there's not many, but I've come up with one, is that potentially a contrib module could say extend the header, could add an additional option to here to say provide like an anchor link or something. So you know how sometimes headings can be anchor links that you can then click to and the browser goes to that heading. So it potentially opens up a small ecosystem of modules that could use this as a way to add additional functionality. And by making this a formatter, we just on its own, we do make it easier for that to happen, I think. So my vote would be to, for that reason, I guess, is to keep it as one. And I suppose if in the future we decide that Drupal decides to expand this to be plain text can have tags, then that could always be migrated back in to be, part of plain text.
But I don't see why it's easier to expand this new formatter that we're adding instead of expanding the plain text formatter that we're improving.
I guess it's suppose it's not any easier or harder. I was just trying to think of a reason why we might add add this one. But you're right. I suppose a module could add anchor links option to the regular one. Maybe it just makes it easier for the user to see that this is an option. Maybe it's like, configuration is a bit cleaner. Like configuration might only have, this option would then only be added on the configuration for this option will only be there for fields which are set as headers. Like you could more easily see in your configuration where, okay, these fields are headers. That's potentially an advantage, I guess. I feel like I'm grasping at straws here, so.
Ralph, can you close that? So we do have in the summary of the formatter settings that it's displayed as an H2. So you don't need to open up the settings to see that information. Thomas, did you want to add something?
Just that through the course of talking through things, my vote is going to be to support just enhancing the regular formatter. That's it. Like I was going to say more, and it would be a long-winded way to say that.
Okay. Ralph?
Just a brief addition, because I just noticed the form of those two statements should be in line. At the moment, it's linked to the content and display as H2. Shouldn't it be displayed as H2?
Right, or link to the content.
Yeah.
Yes, they should be consistent. Totally agree. Andre?
Yeah, just one thing, maybe it's somewhat unrelated. I mean, yes, I would also support the simplification or just combining things into one formatter. But I noticed, so if we're keeping all the H2, so I mean H options and div and span, would a P tag would potentially be needed there as well? That's a fairly common thing too. But I'm not sure. Maybe I'm kind of thinking I'm not I'm not sure of the specific use case, but that maybe a P tag would be useful in that list as well.
Yeah, it certainly could be.
Yeah, but my vote would also be to just combine things and simplify things in terms of not using two different formatters for these things.
And Aaron is saying in the chat all sorts of other tags we might use, like pre-code, block quote.
Yeah, then we're going to that fences category, fences module, which yeah.
To be clear, that the etc is not meant to be a tag. I was just I realized why I wrote that. That didn't occur to me until after I sent a message. Typically there is no etc tag, just for the record.
Right. Okay, anything else before we take a vote? Okay. Who thinks that, as in the current version of the issue, we should have a new formatter? I'm not seeing any replies. Who thinks that we should be enhancing the existing plain text formatter? Get a thumbs up from Ralph. And okay, I agree too. I have to scroll a little bit. Yes, we are unanimous. Okay. And that means we don't have to worry about what to call it, whether to call it title or header or something else. So then,
just for the record, I think you've all effectively convinced me otherwise. So because also in the spirit of this, like potentially this opens up for things like, say we did add like, block quote, you could make it possible, like maybe either a contrib module or in core, we could make it possible to add classes or add, bring more of what fences does in. So yeah, that actually sounds like a better way to build an ecosystem around this.
yeah, should we make it a recommendation for the current issue that it provides some way to extend the options.
That feels like a follow-up because
Okay.
otherwise it's never going to get done.
Okay, and Ralph agrees with that. So I guess the only remaining questions are the label and description or help text for the new drop-down list. And I guess I was suggesting that the description or the help text isn't really needed at all. Although I think there was some pushback for that. Again, looking at fences, it has field tag and field items wrapper tag and field item tag and label tag. But since we're not going with that level of complexity, we would presumably just have tag. Aaron?
Since it's such a simple form, I kind of already like the display as text that shows on the summary, because the way it reads is like display as H2 or display as P. And I think if you know you need that, you understand like what that means. And so I feel like for the dropdown to also say display as, to me seems quite intuitive, I guess.
Okay. Ralph?
Just one question. Should it be then displayed as or display as? Just in regards of the consistency with the other statement there.
Right, we certainly could make the label on the form display as, and then make the summary displayed as.
Yeah, because link to content is here, but in the summary it says linked to content. So
yep,
probably should just follow that pattern.
And we got a thumbs up from Simo on that as well. So does anyone prefer something like tag rather than display as? Or I guess I'm asking for another vote, the two options being display as or tag. Does anyone prefer tag? I don't feel strongly. And who prefers display as? Getting a couple of thumbs up, 3. Okay. So let's go with display as. Do we need help text or description?
I've removed it just to illustrate.
Thanks. Thomas?
So the one question I have is if our recommendation is to roll this into the enhancing the existing like formatter. What is it? How do we make certain it's very clear what the default state is? So I'm just thinking what happens if someone has something there and they switch it to H2 and it was a mistake and they leave and another admin comes in. Like, is there any way to give them a clear indicator what the default state is for this? Is that something that's important to have in the first place?
Well, I guess probably the default should be at the top of the list. So since we are extending the plain text formatter, whatever that uses by default, which I think is div, should be the default option and at the top of the list. Yeah, I get a thumbs up from Thomas. And I get an up arrow from Aaron. Ralph?
Just one thought, because I was a bit occupied while you were voting, changing things in the DevTools, but I wonder, because display as, or just the display verb is sort of not sure, wouldn't the wrap instead of that be clearer? Because that is what it's actually doing. You wrap basically that text within that tag.
Thomas?
My concern is that I don't know that a lot of people would know off the bat what that means. Like I understand what wrap means, but it feels more technical. But yeah.
Aaron?
Yeah, I work a lot with content designers, and we, and user experience people, and we talk about when we're setting out like content structures, we talk about, how do we want this to display? What do we want to display as? So when they're talking about like, display as a heading or something, that's a really natural way of talking about it. And I feel like when you say like display is H2 and you go look at it and you say, okay, this displays as an H2, like that's a really natural way of thinking about it. And I agree with what Thomas said.
Okay. Ralph, do you still want to push back, or are you giving a thumbs up? Okay. And Ralph used DevTools to remove the help text. Does anyone want to bring it back? I mean, the general principle is that if your labels are well chosen, you mostly don't need help text. And I think that applies here. Aaron is giving a down arrow. Thomas is giving a thumbs up. This is a little ambiguous. Does anyone want to bring it back?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay, we are 1 minute away. One thing we should do is review the parent issue, and there might be some reason why they've explicitly decided to have a new formatter rather than extend the plain text formatter. So someone should take that on before leaving a comment. Would anyone like to do that work and then leave the comment? And if not, I'm willing to do that. Okay, I will leave the comment. Thanks all. I think this has been productive. We came up with a very simple idea to make the form a little simpler, which is a good thing. So hope you can make it next week. Thanks for coming.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Good weekend.
Thank you. Have a great
Nice weekend.
weekend. Have a nice weekend.